Callisto Grand Partner Spotlight. Today, my guest is Jayne Martin, who's the Senior Director, Financial Automation Solutions at Quadient.
Yes. Hi. Nice to see you, Mark.
Welcome aboard.
Thanks.
Let's kick off by getting to know a bit about your background and career path.
Sure. So I do have a history of having the longest titles in the world. So originally I was a practitioner myself, so started my career actually as a collector in the order to cash space, and was in that space for a little over 20 years. Throughout that time, sort of moved up through the ranks, supervised, managed, and then finally became a director of a global organization running the order to cash function. And throughout that time, onboarded lots of different software solutions, onboarded credit card processing globally for the company I was working for, and found that was really something that I enjoyed doing, sort of the project management piece and sort of automating and selecting solutions. So then when the opportunity came along to join Quadient Accounts Receivable, I jumped at the chance. It was kind of an opportunity to be on the other side of the fence, if you will. So originally started just consulting for Quadient, and then moved more into sort of a pre-sales role, supporting our sales team, obviously bringing that sort of practitioner experience. And then now I'm sort of overseeing the financial automation solutions globally, so both our AR and our AP products. And I kind of do a little bit of everything. So I'm kind of involved in everything from product development and delivery all the way through the sales cycle. And then on the back end, helping with our sort of client success teams, making sure our customers are happy and utilizing the solution. And of course, I get to do things like this from a marketing perspective as well.
Well, it's exciting times in technology and indeed the credit O2C space, isn't it? It's really
Absolutely, yes.
invigorating time. Lots going on, as you said.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into that a little bit then. So, how do you see the role of accounts receivable evolving in today's digitally driven finance departments?
Yeah, so I've really seen a lot of change, I think, in the sort of the time frame of my career. I think, 20 years ago, it was very much sort of a back office function, kind of, people just got the job done. There wasn't a lot of sort of glamour to that role at all. And I think what we're seeing now is it's a much more critical piece of sort of the CFO's office, right? We have a much louder voice, I think, in the direction of organizations. Obviously, the accounts receivable department collects all the money and ensures that the company stays afloat and has working capital to invest and grow and expand. So I think what we're seeing now is it becoming a much more critical piece of the puzzle within organizations, and a much larger spotlight on the function. So it's really changed from being sort of this, sort of fairly sort of hidden back office function to now being front and center and particularly top of mind within the C-suite.
And yeah, I think it's more returning center stage. Yeah, it's a long time of being sort of pushed into the background and not before time, eh?
Exactly.
You were saying about CFOs earlier. What what trends are you seeing then that finance leaders really can't ignore?
So I think what we're seeing is obviously the need to automate. That's not new, but I think there's growing pressure on that. And within that, I think we're seeing CFOs want to have sort of a more global picture of their financial position. That's both from an AP and an AR standpoint. Obviously, the automation is something they can't ignore anymore. Although you'd be surprised how many times we hear that folks are still, using spreadsheets and
Not
post-it
surprised.
notes. And
Not surprised.
um, I would say, just from an efficiency and transparency standpoint, CFOs really need to embrace the fact that this is a function that needs to be focused on. They need to be looking for efficiencies and driving their results from that function. So I think it's really important that they sort of get on board with that and understand the importance of the function.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you said there, they are an AP, it's working capital, right? The
Exactly.
the most essential part of any business.
exactly.
So what do you see as the next frontier then for digital transformation?
Well, I mean, obviously, the last few years we've heard sort of non-stop about AI, right? And that's started to take a hold. And I think it was a bit of a buzzword for a while. People didn't really understand, how it would impact the finance role. I mean, I think we've all sort of seen it with, your feed on your social media as an example, right? The algorithms can kind of supply you with things of interest, and we've seen people using it for, creating photographs, right? Like their headshots, et cetera. But I don't think anyone really understood the impact in a financial operations space. And even beyond that now, I think we're now starting to see a lot of this agentic AI, right? How are we sort of using AI to drive decisions and, even have sort of almost conversations with our customers or even between different bots within the solution. So we're starting to see that really pick up, and sort of removing a lot of the sort of day-to-day sort of manual work that teams are doing and starting to place more of the emphasis on using agentic AI to complete those tasks. So I think we'll see a lot more of that in the future. Again, I think it's still a little bit new. I think people are still a little, dubious around it. But we're going to start to see that more and more embedded in financial automation solutions across the board, honestly. So I think that will be where we're headed next.
Yes, and I think as we've been a couple of years into this now, that yeah, as people are getting more aware of it, and yes, more aware of what it does and wary of where it's going as well, the potential
Exactly.
for good and the potential for not so good, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
it's yeah, but like every new innovation, it's got pluses and minuses at the start. Um,
Exactly.
I got to say, congratulations on your recent promotion to a senior director of financial automation solutions. Nice one for that. What does this new role mean to you, and how does it align with your vision for transferring automation?
So, well, thank you, first of all. So, what it means for me is it just puts me in a slightly different position than where I was before. I'm actually reporting directly into our chief solutions officer. So, I have the ear of the person that makes all of the decisions around our financial automation solution. So, that for me, first of all, is an honor, and a large responsibility. It's my job to sort of feed up to him, where I think we should go from a strategy standpoint. What's working, what's not working, where we need to invest, where we need to no longer focus. So I think that's really gonna provide him with some insights. As I mentioned before, I've always been kind of had my hands in many pies, but wasn't really filtering that information up to where it could be a strategic initiative. So from that perspective, I think it's a heavy crown to wear, but it's an important one. I think I've got sort of the experience in the background to kind of understand what the market needs, what our customers are looking for, what direction we should go in.
Mhm.
So hopefully I'm able to execute that well, and really help lead our product in the right direction. And I think that's really going to change, our offerings. Honestly, I think it's going to help shape where we go in the future.
Makes you an influencer
It does,
in the modern
yes,
parlance.
finally.
But you've spent most of your career in credit order to cash.
Mhm.
What lessons have you learned about leading through change in our, particularly in this fintech sector?
I always think it's important to be flexible, right? I think that a lot of times organizations are embracing change and automation. They may have a very specific uh, plan in mind, and I think oftentimes there needs to be flexibility. You need to be able to sort of understand the implications of things as you're rolling out those types of solutions. I also think transparency too. I mean, we talked a little bit about how change can be a little bit scary. And I think it's important to make sure that your teams understand the direction you're going in, how it will benefit them, how it will change their current roles. Sometimes you get a little pushback from folks that are concerned about their jobs, as an example, right? Like, how is this going to impact my job?
Mm,
And it may in some ways, but it may also make their roles better. So I think transparency is important. I think flexibility is important. And just kind of be open-minded, I think, is important as well. Sometimes we just need to kind of question why we're doing things the way we are, and what does different look like.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And with all the technology advances we've made, particularly in the last 40 years or so, um, largely people are still remained employed, right? So
Yeah,
I don't think there's need to be a great deal of fear, is there? You might be doing something different, but in a lot of ways, I think particularly now, like you said earlier, it's going to take a lot of the mundanity out of a lot of jobs. So you've got the more
yeah,
interesting analytical research and investigative elements of the job, which is where the real enjoyment is. Yeah, I think that's what I
exactly.
enjoyed, and I think perhaps yourself as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny. I always use the analogy when Excel first came on the scene, right? Bookkeepers all over the world thought that was going to be the end of accounting, and it hasn't been. I mean, it's obviously enhanced their work, right? It's made things easier, but we still need a human at the end of the day. So it's kind of the same thing with financial automation. Like what it hopefully and intends to do is remove sort of the repetitive, mundane aspects of the job, which then obviously can lead to those employees having a more sort of influential role or a more consultative role. So I think ultimately it's a good thing.
Yeah, and that fits nicely kind of what we're about in Callisto as well. We're primarily a training organization. That's at the
Mhm.
core of what we do. And for people to advance, like I said, with technology it is now, or even going back to you were saying about Excel,
Mhm.
the critical thing is for people to understand the wider business context, not just working in a silo, which is what we do really. Yes, you can work in
Mhm.
collections or risk or disputes or whatever, but you've really got to understand where it all fits into the wider business, and that's how you can embrace the technologies of today, right? So
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, so being open-minded, like you said, and flexible. And kind of following on from that, where do you see the role of sort of cross-functional collaboration playing in, scaling up as well?
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of different stakeholders involved in, financial technology. It's not just, obviously, in our case, the order to cash team, right? You need to involve the IT team. Obviously, you need to involve the sales team at some point because that will impact their customers, their end users. So it really is kind of a meeting of the minds. Like when we talk about a financial automation project with a potential customer, we stress that it's really important to get the buy-in of those other departments to make sure everybody's on board, everybody understands what's happening. Are there things we don't know about that need to be considered? So it really does bring together a lot of those teams that may have traditionally been siloed or even kind of frenemies, right? Like the sales team and the credit team often are kind of at odds. But a lot of times with these projects, you can kind of see where there's common ground, and it actually ends up sort of fostering those relationships a little better. So we definitely encourage involving all of those stakeholders in the decision making and in the planning to ensure that sort of we're addressing all of the needs across an organization.
I agree with that, and I think one of the critical areas where we can really advance is in like predictive analytics, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't have to be that complex. Just
Right.
we can just take in information that's been around for decades anyway, the credit limit, the balance outstanding, the average sales per week or per month. You can easily predict when, if the situation stays as it is, when an account will go on stop, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
and you can offset that.
Exactly.
That's not rocket science, but the
Right.
ability of like Quadient is that you can bring huge amounts of data together and make these reports, these simple analytics, and more complex things as well, of course. And that can be fed out to sales teams, business units, supply chain, whoever's involved. So
Exactly.
that's to me, that's where the kind of real this cross-functional aspect comes in, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
like you said,
Exactly.
to give visibility on things that before on spreadsheets or whatever would have been more difficult to pull together, right?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in the past it was always very reactive. Now at least we can kind of get in front of those problems, and we can also, help our sales team understand like these are the customers you should be selling more to, right? Like these are the customers that are bumping up against that credit limit but pay us on time. And then these are the customers where we maybe need to scale back, and it becomes more of a conversation and a consulting aspect rather than just the salesperson all of a sudden finding out that their customers on hold. They don't know why, they don't know what happened, now they're
Yes.
scrambling. So again, just kind of creates a better communication flow across those two organizations.
It does, and I know, from my own operational time, that putting an account on hold is annoying for everybody.
Yeah.
So of course, salespeople, the customer, order entry, the supply chain. We never really take into effect, the actual dispatch of the goods, which is also
Right.
a fragile and complex operation. You got trucks waiting and all this stuff. So and you can always guarantee, of course, there's a hold at 3 o'clock on a Friday, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
Where did that come from? But yes,
Yeah.
so yeah, no, but again, it comes back to my point of knowing how to use this information, the potential of what you got and what you can do different. I think a lot of companies are guilty of just kind of recreating what they had before and
Yes,
not really taking advantage of what can be done. Right?
exactly. Yeah.
Great. So following on from that, can you share a success story where a client's seen say a rapid transformation from working with yourselves?
Yeah, I sure can. We obviously have a lot of customer testimonials that we can reference. What we generally see, I can speak in sort of general terms, is a lot of our customers come to us initially because they have no automation in place, or they're unhappy with the solution they currently have, right? So it's usually one of those two things. In the first case, right, where they have nothing, they don't even really know what's out there, and so what we typically see in those types of scenarios is an immediate return on investment, with sort of things like lowering DSO, reducing time to payment, because a lot of times in those scenarios, they don't have the sort of automated dunning process and follow up, right? They don't have the ability to identify customers that are not receiving invoices or habitually paying those invoices late. So they have no sort of segmentation of their client base. So what we generally see there, as I mentioned, is a sort of a reduction in DSO, shortening of the time to payment. And then there's also sort of soft benefits as well, right? We talked a little bit about the improvement of relationships across teams internally. We see more transparency in how we're handling the accounts, better information for managers, right? Easy access to see what's going on with accounts that might be in different countries or across the globe, where collectors maybe are on different time zones. So we see a lot of those sort of soft benefits as well. And a lot of times what we also get feedback, a couple of months in, is that the teams really enjoy using the solution. So they actually get an improved experience and actually, sort of like their jobs a little bit better, right? They're no longer just sitting and, pushing out emails and sending reminders to customers. They're actually able to sort of get under the hood and understand, why are these customers not paying us on time, or what trends do we need to fix? Is there something further up the path? Is there something wrong in the pricing, as an example, that needs to be corrected, and that's what's causing these invoices to be delayed? So we see a lot of sort of hard ROI benefits pretty quickly, and then of course those soft ones as well. And generally, when we look through our customer testimonials, those are sort of the themes that we see: sort of enhanced reporting, enhanced efficiencies, and a quick return on investment.
I think that you're right. And I think one of the things that we observe from our perspective, and again, something that's way, way, way overdue, how the visibility around the whole receivables piece, or the O2C piece, how that's now pushing quality improvements further upstream, basically
Exactly.
data entry, master data, right? Because it's
Yep.
garbage in,
Yep.
garbage out otherwise, isn't it?
Exactly.
So you got to get it right first time. So I see a lot now, a lot more discussion and focus on the actually getting the orders right, or getting that database right. And that's been something we've been campaigning since we started, and it's actually
Hmm.
starting to really happen now, isn't it?
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
Okay. How do you measure success then for organizations working with Quadient?
So a lot of times, we'll obviously ask the customers what their sort of goals are, like what are they looking to accomplish. Like I mentioned, obviously we're tracking KPIs, right? So we're looking at things like a reduction in DSO, a reduction in disputed invoices, a reduction in credit risk across our organization. Those are the types of things that we're looking at in our sort of quarterly business reviews with our customers. Are they driving their customers to electronic payments, as an example? That's something that certainly in the US is, believe it or not, still a thing. So people still send paper checks.
Yes.
And we're obviously trying to reduce that. So we're able to give a lot of statistics around the full credit to cash process with our solution. We essentially track almost every data point, to the point that you can almost get sort of data paralysis, right? Like you could just look at so many different facets.
Yeah.
So we'll try and hone in with our customers on what their sort of key objectives are and how we can track those and then measure those, right? Let's see, what, your average, payment time when you first launched and what it is 3 months later. And are we seeing a trend moving down? Are we seeing your CSAT scores improve, right? Are your customers happy with the experience? Are they getting their invoices on time? Are they able to pay them easily? Are they purchasing more? So we'll track all of those types of things to try and understand what success looks like for our customers. And then, of course, from our perspective, obviously, a happy customer is our definition of success. If we've got someone that really enjoys using our solution, is obviously willing to talk about it or share that with other practitioners. Are they happy with their response times if they have a support ticket, those types of things. So we're really driving for our customers to be happy and ultimately for the end user to be happy.
Yeah, and you were saying like most of the measures there are all the if you had like top 10 of things you needed to measure in any business, I think you covered most of them there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the observations again we see is that and one of the benefits of going through the RFI and the RFP processes like with yourselves is companies don't actually know the condition of their receivables portfolio in the first place.
Right.
So they have to do this analysis because you'll be asking how many accounts you got, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll probably go, wow, we didn't actually know that ourselves. We haven't measured this for 10 years or something. We didn't know we had
Mm-hmm.
17% overdue and so on and so on, right? So that's a
Exactly.
victory in itself, isn't it? Just
Yes.
this, well, we did not know we were this good or not so good.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times, they'll have very specific pain points. And sometimes those are tricky, right? Like they may have a organizational structure that doesn't make sense, or just processes that they've always done that maybe they need to consider changing. Like something that we often encounter is, well, we've always done it this way for this customer, right? This customer is an outlier and they don't fit in the box of all our
Yes.
other customers. And that's always an interesting conversation to kind of ask, is it the right way to continue doing it, or should we think about making something a little bit more standardized? And sometimes you'll get a little pushback on that, but ultimately we usually find that our customers sort of see the light and understand that they don't need to be doing all these sort of ad hoc activities, that they actually can sort of proceed with a more standardized approach, and it won't upset anybody.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking of back in my day when I was going through similar processes, and when I was doing the analytics prior to the RFIs and so on, I found in my company we had something more than 200 payment terms, all
Yep,
slight variations, and each business unit called it something else, but it was essentially the same. And going into the shared service center business model, the whole point of shared services is standardization, right? So
exactly.
this is one of the things that kind of comes up as well. You got so many variations of the same thing, so you take one day off this customer's payment, or you add one day on there, but now you've only got 10 payment terms rather than 200, right? And like you said,
Exactly.
no one's even going to notice most of the time.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Customer's not going to go running away because you changed the payment date by one,
Right.
and they don't even know
Yeah.
most of the time, do they? So,
Yeah, exactly.
but where you have variation, you have cost, right?
Exactly. And then it's unmanageable at some point. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and that's the beauty of these projects, and I'm all for them. One other thing I'd like to discuss also, alongside what we've just been talking about, is a lot of companies are going through things like S4 HANA transition, or they have a lot of legacy systems, through M&A or whatever. We're very much champions of saying you don't have to put everything into SAP or Oracle and then talk to Quadient. You can map everything. That's the whole point of like the Quadient, isn't it? You can map everything up and you can be doing all these benefits, and you can play around with the ERPs as a separate project, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's actually one of the nice benefits and a challenge that we encounter fairly often. As you say, like as companies are expanding and they're acquiring other companies, they do have, multiple legacy systems, and we're actually able to ingest data from multiple sources. So we have different ways of doing that, right? Depending on what the integration methods are, but we can pull in that data from different sources and then sort of give you that sort of holistic view of what's going on across all of your businesses. And again, that sort of leads then to that standardization, right? The data may be in different places, but now we've got it all in one place. We can measure apples to apples. We can make sure all of our customers are getting the same experience. And it really does kind of tie those things together. So yeah, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't want to do this until I've gotten through this ERP upgrade or this ERP change. And it's like, well, we can still work with you while that's going on in the background. Generally the fields in the ERPs are fairly similar, so to cross over isn't that complicated. And you can get the benefits of having our solution right away, right? Rather than waiting another year before that actually happens. So yeah, definitely always encourage people to take a look.
And it brings that holistic view of within multiple, going back like to the shared service center model again,
Mm-hmm.
it's trading with the same company in many countries or across business
Yep,
units. You can bring it all together. And then you got a very different business relationship. You got a key account rather than 20 medium-sized accounts or small accounts.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really good from a risk perspective and everything else. Yep.
And the same on the flip side, on the AP side as well. You mentioned earlier, the same thing. You can be buying from the same supplier across many countries or locations or cities or offices. Then you've got the purchasing power then as well. You say, wow, we're spending a
Exactly.
million with you every month or whatever across 20 different sites, but my company is paying a million to your company. So let's talk about that, right? You bring
Exactly.
that down, yeah. So,
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
okay, we can talk about this for hours, I'm sure. Um, so let's look forward then. Where are we going? What's your vision for the future in the next 5 years or the rest of this decade?
Yeah. So it's a question I ponder often and sometimes have to wonder if I really know the answer. I think what we are going to see is a tighter consolidation of tech stacks, right? I think most financial solutions are starting to look at bigger picture, right? So in the past, maybe you had an AP solution that just dealt with sort of, invoices coming in and paying them, perhaps, right? Or the AR solution might be just invoice delivery, and then you'd have a different solution for credit risk, and you have a different solution for cash application. Even beyond that, right? And then we start thinking about like treasury, and we start thinking about procurement. Like there's so many other pieces in that process. So I think the future is really going to be consolidating tech stacks so that you have fewer solutions across the board. I think we are going to see, as I said, more of this agentic AI. So I think we're going to see more decisioning coming from an automated bot. I hate to use that word, but I think we'll see a lot of that. Even things like contract analysis, obviously credit risk is a good one. I even think we'll see that in sort of the billing across portals where like bots will speak to each other. I mean, I'm praying for that one because those portals are a pain point for everybody. Um, and I think the sky's the limit, honestly. Where I do think we'll still be hesitant, obviously, is in any kind of audit scenario, right? I think that we trust these things to an extent, but there still needs to be human eyes on some of those things. So I think that's maybe a little bit further off in the future. But I think we're going to see the consolidation of tech stacks. I think we're going to see growth in those tech stacks to cover more and more of the process. And then sort of fewer and fewer of those sort of like mundane tasks being done by actual humans.
Mm. And even from an
Mhm.
audit perspective as well, a lot of that
Mhm.
can be done through technology. I mean, identifying the outliers where auditors go and look at things,
Exactly.
that's an easy thing now, rather than trawling through 100 or 1,000 invoices or whatever. The system,
Exactly.
you can set up those outliers, can't you, as a report? So,
Exactly.
all the
Yeah.
invoices over 10 million or whatever, so
Exactly.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. And as a senior leader in this space, then how do you, and particularly now in your new role, how do you kind of stay ahead of the game as well? How do you anticipate what's going to come?
I spend a lot of my time reading, right? So reading different articles and journals and trolling LinkedIn, looking at webinars. I also attend a lot of outside conferences where I can kind of hear feedback from the ground up, right? What are practitioners faced with today? What are they looking for? What solutions appeal to them? And really kind of just keep myself well informed in the space, and try and stay ahead of it as much as I can. And it's a little bit of a daunting task sometimes because there's a wealth of information out there. It's a little bit difficult sometimes to understand what's real and what's not. But that's definitely sort of my game plan. I just really stay close to the folks actually doing the jobs, and then going to a lot of these sort of conferences where companies are showing what they're doing and kind of leading edge technologies. I think it's important that I understand, those changes as they're happening. So that's kind of how I sort of keep myself in the loop. That's really the best way I know how.
And customer reaction has got to be a huge source, yeah, because their markets are constantly changing. So
Exactly.
your responsibility to adapt to them, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we listen to customer feedback pretty closely, to make sure we're driving in the right direction.
I think what advice would you give to finance leaders that are still a little bit hesitant to get on board this sort of technology train, shall we say?
Mm. Well, I would say they can't really afford not to at this point. I also generally will say, like, rather than think about it as a full transformation, sort of end to end, maybe you start with whatever your greatest pain point is, right? So if you can identify what's causing the most sort of pain within that process, and maybe you start there and you just think about how you could make that more efficient with technology. What would that look like? What would you need to do to get that involved? A lot of times when we're prospecting with a customer, they have a very specific challenge, right? Maybe they just don't have a dunning process and that's what they want to fix. And so when we show them the solution, which is full end to end, they may say, well, I don't need the credit piece yet, or I don't need the cash app piece yet. And that's fine, right? Like, okay, then we'll just solve the problem that you have today. But just bear in mind that we do have these other solutions available. So I think a lot of times there's hesitancy because it seems like such a sort of laborious project to go through, and how much time is it going to take and how much money is it going to cost. And I think sometimes just kind of really whittling it down to what's the immediate need and what's the challenge and how can we fix that quickly,
Mm.
can make it feel a bit more like a bite-sized piece, right? Like you can go, oh, okay, well, I can take care of that, this year as an example. So I would definitely kind of look at it that way. And I just understand, from an organizational perspective, like if you're not moving into the future, you're going to have a hard time retaining employees. You're going to have a hard time staying ahead. So you really kind of do need to get on board at least in some way, and just understand that there's so many efficiencies available that will really make life better for you and your employees.
I think, yeah,
um,
and I think that what you just said at the end there, I think that's a very good point. And that, like, people who come to our conferences, for example, we have 50, 60 different shared service centers coming and talking to each other. And you can imagine the reaction of what you just said, like, oh yeah, we're working with Quadient, he does this, that, and the other, and they're thinking, oh, we're still doing spreadsheets and macros and yada yada yada,
yep,
right?
yep,
And
exactly, yep,
that's pretty depressing when you go back to work and so knowing there's something much more interesting, exciting, and quicker and slicker out there, and then you go back to that. So good
exactly.
point. And I think this is now a critical part of talent retention, which is also one of the high profile objectives of shared service center leaders. Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, employee turnover is devastating, right? Like you lose institutional knowledge, you've got to hire someone, train someone. So it's definitely important to keep your staff happy and for as long as you can. And I think, with the risk of sounding old, the younger generation just expects technology. Like they haven't lived in a world without it. So I think, if you want to start, bringing in bright new talent, you're going to have to be on board with what they're expecting.
and also one of the critical things is when you're working with yourselves, that right at the beginning of the project, engage as many the people working in cash app collections, whatever, get as many of them involved at the beginning, doing simple analytics. How many
Hmm.
remittances do we have? How many payment methods? How many payment terms? That
Hmm.
gets these people involved right at the beginning, and that
Exactly.
critical part of feeling you're part of something, and that's a critical part of retention, right?
Yep, exactly. Absolutely. And how you impact the organization as a whole. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's exciting times, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've come to the end of our questions. Sarah Jane, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been really
Sure.
enjoyable from our
Thank
side,
you. Yeah,
and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
great. Thank you so much. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.